What does it really mean for a citizen's voice to be heard? Well, a massive new report just took the pulse of democracy all across Africa. And honestly, the findings might just change how you think about people power. So let's get into it and break it all down. Okay, so let me ask you something. When you hear that phrase, citizen power, what's the first image that pops into your head? Is it something, kind of quiet and orderly? Something that happens on a schedule? Maybe you've thought of this, the good old ballot box. It's the classic, right? The fundamental act of democratic participation. For most of us, it's the cornerstone of how we think about making our voices count. Or maybe your mind went somewhere else, something a little louder, a little more disruptive, a crowd of people gathered in the streets demanding change. This is another really powerful form of citizen expression, but it's operating on a completely different frequency than voting, isn't it? Well, the fascinating thing is, the real answer isn't just one or the other. This huge new report gives us a super detailed, continent-wide picture of what citizen power actually looks like on the ground today. And yeah, some of the findings are definitely going to surprise you. All right, so first up, let's zoom out and just look at the big picture. What is the overall health, the pulse of citizen engagement across the continent right now? All this info comes from the 2025 Afrobarometer report. And let me tell you, this is no small-scale study. We're talking about a massive survey that covers 39 different countries. That represents more than 3/4 of the entire continent's population. I mean, that's an incredible amount of data to work with. And at its heart, the report is trying to answer a really simple but pretty profound question. How are people actually getting involved? What actions are they taking to be a part of the civic and political life of their countries? And the number one answer, and it's not even close, is voting. Yep. Despite all the different ways people can engage these days, showing up for national elections is still the most common form of political participation across these 39 nations. But that's where the simple part of this story ends. Because when you start to break down that data by age, whoa, a really fascinating and complex picture starts to emerge. The report actually calls it the youth paradox. Okay, so what the data shows is a really clear generational gap. Young people, so we're talking about ages 18 to 35, they are consistently less likely to vote in elections than older citizens are. And this trend holds true for other formal stuff too, like going to community meetings. But, and this is a huge but, it's the key to the whole paradox. That does not mean young people are disengaged. The report says, and I'm quoting here, that youth are more likely than older citizens to engage in protests. This is the one major area where their participation numbers are actually higher. And this just lays it out perfectly. When you look at the traditional, formal ways of participating, like voting, youth engagement is down. But when you look at protest, it's up. See? They're not checked out. They are just checking in a totally different way. And this all leads us to a really critical insight from the report. If you really want to understand citizen power, you have got to look way beyond just the ballot box. I mean, the report details this whole rich ecosystem of engagement. People are going to community meetings, they're contacting their political leaders directly, they're actually getting together with their neighbors to solve local problems, and they're talking about politics. It's a much, much bigger spectrum of activity than just voting every couple of years. In fact, one of the really standout findings here is that when it comes to this kind of collective, community-level action to solve problems, citizens across these African nations actually participate at a relatively high level compared to other parts of the world. Pretty amazing. Okay, so we know how people are engaging, but what about the why? What is it that makes them want to participate in the first place? What are the drivers behind all this? So the report kind of maps out this powerful pathway to getting involved. It all starts when people feel like their government is actually responsive, that it's genuinely listening to them. When you combine that feeling with a belief that their democracy is high quality, it makes them way more likely to get involved in all sorts of ways. Bottom line, feeling heard really, really matters. Now, the report is super careful here, and it's a point worth making. It finds a strong link, a correlation between these things. It doesn't prove that one thing directly causes the other, but that connection, that association, is crystal clear and really significant. So, putting this all together, what does all this data tell us about the future? Where is citizen engagement on the continent actually headed? All right, let's just do a quick recap of the big takeaways. 1, voting is still the king, but it is far from the only story.
2, this youth paradox shows us that a new generation is engaging in a totally different way, choosing protest over the ballot box. 3, community action is a really strong pillar of civic life. And 4, people get involved when they feel like their voices actually matter.
And all of that leaves us with a huge question for the future. Africa is the world's youngest continent, right? So, as this generation, which is already showing a clear preference for protest, becomes the dominant demographic, what's that going to mean for the nature of citizen power? Is it possible that the power of the protest line could one day become even more powerful than the ballot line? That's a future that reports like this are going to help us understand as it unfolds.